Welcome viewers to yet another edition of The Colonel Speaks. Today we have for you an analysis on the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, its consequences and how it impacts India. Before dwelling on the analysis, it becomes imperative to revisit the circumstances and events which led to this 20-year-old war on Afghan soil.
American 11, are you trying to call?
The cockpit is not answering their phone. Our number 1 has been staffed and our 5 has been staffed.
Hey, I'm going to call from Washington. I have a situation with American 11, a possible hijack.
What's going on, Betty? The aircraft is erratic again. Problem, very erratic. Betty, talk to me. Betty, are you there? Betty? Betty?
The plane just hit the World Trade Center.
What?
The 737.
It what?
Like the World Trade Center.
Who are you talking to?
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
United 175, New York. We have some problems over here right now. We might have a hijack over here, 2 of them.
Jules, this is Ryan. Lives on an airplane that's been hijacked. If things don't go well, and it's not looking good, I just want you to know I absolutely love you. I want you to do good. So have a good time. Same to my parents and everybody. And I just totally love you, and I'll see you later, sir. Bye, babe.
What are those people going to do? All the elevators are blocked out.
Oh my God, so both towers are now.
Okay, now I got an aircraft 6 miles east of the White House.
Hello? Crystal City, just north of Crystal City.
Just to the north of your town.
Yeah, stop all departures.
Pentagon just got hit. No for that. God damn it, I can't even protect my NCA.
United 93, that traffic for you is 1 o'clock, 12 miles eastbound 370.
Negative contact, we're looking United 93.
United 93, Cleveland, if you hear the center right then.
I got that piece of dog. Keep remaining sitting. You have the ball, boss.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that I love them very much. And I'm so sorry, babe. I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
Number 56865. We have, I believe it is a Boeing 757. Can you see him up there, sir?
That's confirmed. It looks like he's rocking his wings.
Roger.
He's rocking back and forth.
Number 56865, I advise you stay away from that aircraft. Go north as fast as you can.
United 93, have you got information on that yet?
Yeah, he's down.
He's down?
Yes.
When did he land?
He did not land.
Oh, he's down?
Yes,
Bound?
somewhere up northeast of Camp David.
Sean, it's me. I just want to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. There's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always.
At number 2 World Trade Center, right. Lady was shooting in the dropping. We're not ready to die, but it's getting bad.
I'm on the 83rd floor. I'm gonna die, aren't I? No. Say I'm gonna die.
Ma'am, say your prayers. We're going to think positive because you got to help each other get off the floor.
I'm gonna die.
New type of war. That's what it is.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban.
Following the terrorist attacks on 9/11/2001, several nations took part in the Afghan war against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which was named as Operation Enduring Freedom, which started on 7th of October 2001. Some nations' operations in Afghanistan continued as part of NATO's International Security Assistance Force, or as we know as ISAF. In 2006, NATO's focus in the southern Afghanistan was to form provincial reconstruction teams, that is, in Helmand province by the British, Uruzgan and Kandahar provinces by Netherlands, Australia and Canada, and in Zabul province by the US. The order of battle, or ORBAT, included Australia, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Romania, United Kingdom and the United States. As of now, there has been approximately 2,700 US military deaths in the war in Afghanistan, of which 1,900 deaths have resulted due to hostile action. Approximately 20,320 have been wounded in action, in addition to 1,720 US civilian deaths. The average civilian deaths per year has been 1,500, while the average figures for the injured stands at 3,000. During the London Conference on Afghanistan on 28th of January 2010, Afghanistan announced its intention of taking charge of the majority of operations in the insecure areas of Afghanistan within 3 years and taking responsibility of physical security within 5 years. This, combined with the increase of Afghan military strength to 1,71,600 and police numbers to 1,34,000 by October 2011, would enable the United States to transition US troops out of Afghanistan by July 2011. According to US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, it's not an exit strategy, it's about assisting the Afghans in taking responsibility for their own security. On 22nd June 2011, Obama addressed the nation from the White House and announced that 10,000 troops would be withdrawn by the end of 2011 and an additional 23,000 troops will leave the country by the summer of 2012.
Good evening. Nearly 10 years ago, America suffered the worst attack on our shores since Pearl Harbor. This mass murder was planned by Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network in Afghanistan and signaled a new threat to our security, one in which the targets were no longer soldiers on a battlefield, but innocent men, women, and children going about their daily lives. In the days that followed, our nation was united as we struck at al-Qaeda and routed the Taliban in Afghanistan. Then our focus shifted. A second war was launched in Iraq, and we spent enormous blood and treasure to support a new government there. By the time I took office, the war in Afghanistan had entered its 7th year. But al-Qaeda's leaders had escaped into Pakistan and were plotting new attacks, while the Taliban had regrouped and gone on the offensive. Without a new strategy and decisive action, our military commanders warned that we could face a resurgent al-Qaeda and a Taliban taking over large parts of Afghanistan. For this reason, in one of the most difficult decisions that I've made as president, I ordered an additional 30,000 American troops into Afghanistan. When I announced this surge at West Point, we set clear objectives: to refocus on al-Qaeda, to reverse the Taliban's momentum, and train Afghan security forces to defend their own country. I also made it clear that our commitment would not be open-ended and that we would begin to draw down our forces this July. Tonight, I can tell you that we are fulfilling that commitment. Thanks to our extraordinary men and women in uniform, our civilian personnel, and our many coalition partners, we are meeting our goals. As a result, starting next month, we will be able to remove 10,000 of our troops from Afghanistan by the end of this year, and we will bring home a total of 33,000 troops by next summer, fully recovering the surge I announced at West Point. After this initial reduction, our troops will continue coming home at a steady pace as Afghan security forces move into the lead. Our mission will change from combat to support. By 2014, this process of transition will be complete, and the Afghan people will be responsible for their own security.
On 1st May 2012, Afghan President Hamid Karzai and US President Barack Obama signed a strategic partnership agreement between the two countries, officially titled the Enduring Strategic Partnership Agreement between the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and the United States of America. The agreement provided for a long-term framework for the relationship between the two countries after the drawdown of US forces in Afghanistan war. The agreement went into effect on 4th of July 2012. On 21st of May 2012, the leaders of the NATO member countries endorsed an exit strategy during the 2012 NATO summit in Chicago. The NATO-led ISAF forces will hand over command of all combat missions to Afghanistan forces by the middle of 2013, while shifting at the same time from combat to a support role of advising, training, and assisting the Afghan security forces, and then withdraw most of the 130,000 foreign troops by the end of December 2014. A new and different NATO mission will then advise, train, and assist the Afghan security forces, including the Afghan Special Operations Forces. The Tokyo Conference on Afghanistan, held on 8th of July 2012, was a civilian diplomatic bookend to NATO's 2012 May summit in Chicago, where the alliance confirmed plans to withdraw foreign combat troops by the end of 2014 and pledged about $4 billion a year to pay for ongoing training, equipment, and financial support for Afghanistan's security forces. In exchange for pledges from the Afghan government to combat corruption, $16 billion over the next 4 years for civilian projects such as roads, schools, or projects aimed to strengthen the rule of law were pledged by the some 70 nations attending the conference, according to the Tokyo Framework of Mutual Accountability. The effort to hand over security to Afghans was hampered by a spike in attacks by local forces supposed to be working with American and the NATO forces. United States military officials suspended temporarily on 2nd of September 2012 the training of Afghan local police in the wake of a deadly series of so-called green on blue attacks by Afghan soldiers and police on the international allies. On 18th of September 2012, General John Allen suspended all joint combat operations between Afghanistan and American ground units in Afghanistan due to growing concern over insider attacks against US troops by members of the Afghan National Security Forces. On 18th of June 2013, the handover of security from NATO to Afghan forces was completed. The International Security Assistance Force formally handed over control of the last 95 districts to Afghan forces at a ceremony attended by President Karzai and NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen at a military academy outside Kabul.
At Camp David, with my cabinet and generals, to complete our strategy. I arrived at 3 fundamental conclusions about America's core interests in Afghanistan. First, our nation must seek an honorable and enduring outcome worthy of the tremendous sacrifices that have been made, especially the sacrifices of lives. The men and women who serve our nation in combat deserve a plan for victory. They deserve the tools they need and the trust they have earned to fight and to win. Second, the consequences of a rapid exit are both predictable and unacceptable. 9/11, the worst terrorist attack in our history, was planned and directed from Afghanistan because that country was ruled by a government that gave comfort and shelter to terrorists. A hasty withdrawal would create a vacuum that terrorists, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, would instantly fill, just as happened before September 11th. And as we know, in 2011, America hastily and mistakenly, withdrew from Iraq. As a result, our hard-won gains slipped back into the hands of terrorist enemies. Our soldiers watched as cities they had fought for and bled to liberate, and won, were occupied by a terrorist group called ISIS. The vacuum we created by leaving too soon gave safe haven for ISIS to spread, to grow, recruit, and launch attacks. We cannot repeat in Afghanistan the mistake our leaders made in Iraq. Third and finally, I concluded that the security threats we face in Afghanistan and the broader region are immense. Today, 20 U.S. designated foreign terrorist organizations are active in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the highest concentration in any region, anywhere in the world. For its part, Pakistan often gives safe haven to agents of chaos, violence, and terror. The threat is worse because Pakistan and India are two nuclear-armed states whose tense relations threaten to spiral into conflict, and that could happen. No one denies that we have inherited a challenging and troubling situation in Afghanistan and South Asia, but we do not have the luxury of going back in time and making different or better decisions. When I became president, I was given a bad and very complex hand, but I fully knew what I was getting into. Big and intricate problems. But one way or another, these problems will be solved. I'm a problem solver. And in the end, we coming into the hands of terrorists and being used against us or anywhere in the world for that matter. But to prosecute this war, we will learn from history. As a result of our comprehensive review, American strategy in Afghanistan and South Asia will change dramatically in the following ways. A core pillar of our new strategy is a shift from a time-based approach to one based on conditions. I've said it many times how counterproductive it is for the United States to announce in advance the dates we intend to begin or end military options. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy from now on. America's enemies must never know our plans or believe they can wait us out. I will not say when we are going to attack, but attack we will. Another fundamental pillar of our new strategy is the integration of all instruments of American power, diplomatic, economic, and military, toward a successful outcome. Someday, after an effective military effort, perhaps it will be possible to have a political settlement that includes elements of the Taliban in Afghanistan. But nobody knows if or when that will ever happen. America will continue its support for the Afghan government and the Afghan military as they confront the Taliban in the field. Ultimately, it is up to the people of Afghanistan to take ownership of their future, to govern their society, and to achieve an everlasting peace. We are a partner and a friend, but we will not dictate to the Afghan people how to live or how to govern their own complex society. We are not nation building again. We are killing.
Therefore, what was initiated by President Obama in 2011 and carried forward by President Trump finally manifested in the peace agreement being signed by US Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation, Zalmay Khalilzad, and Taliban co-founder Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar on 29th of February 2020 at Doha, which has resulted in initiating the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. It would be prudent now to consider the likely consequences the US withdrawal will have. Number 1. Other NATO members will follow suit. As on date, there are approximately 7,000 troops from NATO nations other than US in Afghanistan. Americans lead the training and assistance mission in the southern and the eastern parts. Germans do the same in north, Italians in the west, and Turks in and around Kabul. Most of the NATO nations have committed troops in Afghanistan as a mark of solidarity with the US. Many of these contingents are dependent on the US logistic and supply chain for sustenance. Number 2. Reduction in humanitarian and other civilian presence. The US withdrawal will affect the presence of humanitarian groups and other civilian agencies involved in nation building. While the NATO forces were not providing security to this personnel directly, however, certain incidental protection was inherent in their presence, which will require these organizations to re-evaluate the tolerability of security risks. Number 3. The US withdrawal implies that US security interests no longer require a significant commitment to Afghan stability. This judgment is likely to get applied for all US resources which hitherto were being provided to Afghanistan and subsequently lead to a drastic reduction in external economic and security assistance. Number 4. Afghan government will begin to lose influence and legitimacy. 50% of the Afghan state budget and 90% of its military and police costs have been borne by the international donors. Reduction in these funds are likely to follow the US withdrawal, which would impact the capabilities of the government in providing healthcare and public services. It would also impact the combat capabilities of the Afghan armed forces and will result in the loss of influence and legitimacy. Number 5. Regional militias will gain prominence. Loss of legitimacy and influence of the government will lead to Taliban ascendance in the Pashtun areas, whereas in the non-Pashtun areas, the regional militias would gain prominence and influence. It will also lead to regional power brokers to transfer trained fighters from the Afghan armed forces to these militias. Number 6. Taliban push towards Kabul and an ensuing civil war. It can be appreciated that a weakened government at Kabul will embolden Taliban to regain what it lost in 2001 to US. It will continue its aggressive push to non-Pashtun areas and engage the regional militias in combat. It is quite likely that a clash may ensue between Taliban and non-Taliban elements for control of the capital, which will lead to another civil war. Number 7. Taliban rescinding on its pledge to US. The costs of the US war in Afghanistan and its withdrawal may after some time tempt the Taliban to reconsider its agreement with the US in not providing any support to extremist groups in Afghanistan. The ethnical proximity of the Taliban to other militant groups in the region would make the agreement difficult to last long. Extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and the ISIS will gain additional scope to organize, recruit, and initiate terrorist attacks against US and other regional targets. Now we will talk on India's role in Afghanistan. Indian aid to Afghanistan has been focused primarily on 4 main categories. Those are humanitarian assistance, major infrastructure projects, small and community-based projects, and education and capacity development. To name a few, building of Afghanistan's parliament, restoration of Store Palace, reconstruction of the Salma Dam, financing Afghan National Agricultural Sciences and Technology University, Anastu, in Kandahar, building of cold storage warehouse in Kandahar, upgrading of telephone exchanges, expanding the national TV network, and of course, building the Zaranj-Dalaram road. Over and above, India has contributed in hundreds of smaller and less visible projects such as establishment of schools, health clinics, gifting of buses, military vehicles, Mi-25 and Mi-35 choppers, ambulances, Airbus aircraft for the national airlines, etc., etc. India is also providing funds to an Afghan Red Crescent Society program, free medicines and medical consultation in its medical missions in 5 Afghan cities. Now we shall talk on the implications for India. India has never been able to make up its mind about Afghanistan. And now with the US withdrawal, the stakes suddenly have become much higher than before. The question that the powers that be in India are asking themselves is whether India should engage the Pakistan-backed Taliban, and if yes, then should it be official or otherwise. While the role that New Delhi has played in Afghanistan is more of reconstruction and rehabilitation, but the overreaching aim has been to limit Islamabad's influence in the region. India's room for maneuver in Afghanistan has been limited by lack of geographical contiguity, by reputational concerns in which it is seen as a constructive regional player, and of course by limited resources. India has built a sizable developmental and considerable intelligence footprint in Afghanistan, spending more than $3 billion in aid and infrastructural development. India has had, in the past, diplomatic nightmares with regards to diplomacy in Afghanistan. It had backed the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, and after their withdrawal, it had supported Najibullah's government, which ended with his ouster. India had always chosen to back anyone in Afghanistan other than the Taliban, which brings to fore the hijacking of Indian Airlines Flight 814 in 1999 by Pakistan-based militants. The plane was taken to Kandahar, which was under Taliban control. India had no leverage, which led to the release of 3 top militants, including Maulana Masood Azhar. Today, with US, Russia, China and Iran directly engaging with Taliban and the credibility of the government in Kabul running an all-time low, it might be prudent for India to reassess its strategy with respect to engaging Taliban. Though India has always maintained backdoor contact with the Taliban, but given the geopolitical situation in Afghanistan, it needs to be re-evaluated. What advantages does engaging the Taliban offer, given that it will always be Pakistan who would be calling the shots? Or is it prudent to continue with its engagement with the legitimate government in Kabul and provide it with more support than before to maintain the balance of power and limit the Taliban, Pakistani and the Chinese influence? If you liked our endeavor in giving you this analysis, then please like, subscribe and share. Jai Hind.